I watched my neighbor tear down a court notice that a judge had personally ordered me to put up, and she did it with the kind of smug confidence that only someone completely sure they're right can have. Then she looked me straight in the eye and said something I still can't quite believe. HOA rules come first around here. Now, if you've ever lived in a neighborhood with a homeowners association, you probably already know where this is going. But what she didn't realize in that moment, standing there with that little orange notice crumpled in her manicured hand, was that the next few weeks were about to become the most expensive lesson of her life. And it all started on a perfectly ordinary morning. I live in a quiet little subdivision just outside Greenville, South Carolina. One of those neighborhoods where the streets curve around into little circles, lawns are always freshly cut, and everybody waves politely when they drive past you, even if you've never actually had a conversation with them. You know the kind of place. Friendly, but not too friendly. My house sits at the end of a short cul-de-sac. Nothing fancy, just a brick ranch with a big oak tree in the front yard and a wooden fence that runs along the back property line. I moved in about 3 years ago after a divorce, looking for somewhere quiet where I could reset my life a bit. Most of my neighbors were decent people, kept to themselves, said hello when they walked their dogs, that kind of thing. Except for one. Her name was Lorraine Pickett. Lorraine had lived in the neighborhood for nearly 15 years, and, according to pretty much everyone who'd been around long enough to remember, she had served on the HOA board for most of that time. She wasn't technically the president anymore, but you could tell she still thought she ran the place. Lorraine was the kind of woman who never stepped outside without looking like she was headed to a country club brunch. Perfectly styled silver blonde hair, oversized sunglasses, crisp linen shirts, and always carrying this little leather folder tucked under one arm like she might need to issue citations at any moment. And honestly, sometimes she did. From the first week I moved in, Lorraine seemed to have taken a special interest in my house. Not in a friendly way. The first letter arrived about 10 days after I unpacked my last box. Apparently, my mailbox was painted the wrong shade of white. Not off-white, not cream, but something Lorraine's letter described as inconsistent with the aesthetic continuity of the community. I remember sitting at my kitchen table reading that thing and laughing out loud. I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. Over the next 2 years, there were more little notices. My recycling bin visible from the street. A flower bed edging that didn't match the approved community style. Once she even complained that the blue tarp covering my firewood stack was visually disruptive. None of it ever escalated into anything serious, but it became pretty clear Lorraine had decided early on that I was the guy in the neighborhood who needed supervision. So when everything finally blew up, it wasn't exactly out of nowhere. The real trouble started with the man who lived behind me. His name was Dale Mercer. Dale had been living in his house long before I bought mine, and according to the paperwork when I moved in, the back property line between our yards ran along the old wooden fence that had probably been there 20 years. At first, we got along fine. We'd chat over the fence sometimes, talk about football, complain about the heat in August, normal neighbor stuff. But about a year after I moved in, Dale decided he wanted to replace his deck. And when the contractors came out to measure everything, suddenly there was a problem. According to Dale's new survey, the fence wasn't actually on the property line. He claimed it was about 3 feet inside his land, which meant, in his mind, a strip of my backyard technically belonged to him. Now, 3 feet might not sound like much, but when it runs the full length of your yard, it's a pretty big chunk of space. We went back and forth for months trying to sort it out. Old records, county maps, even a couple different surveyors. Every time it looked like we were getting close to an answer, something else would contradict it. Eventually, it turned into one of those neighbor disputes that just slowly poisons everything. Friendly conversations stopped. Then the waving stopped. Then one day I came home and noticed little wooden stakes pushed into the grass behind my fence. Dale's version of a property line. That was when I realized we were probably headed for court. And sure enough, 6 months later we were both sitting in a county courtroom while a judge looked through decades of property records trying to untangle the mess. It wasn't dramatic or anything like that. Just paperwork, surveys, and a lot of legal language that made my head spin. But in the end, the judge made a decision. He ruled that the existing fence would remain the recognized boundary until a county survey crew could come out and officially mark the line. In the meantime, he issued a temporary order requiring both sides to leave the boundary markers alone. To make sure no one tampered with anything, the court clerk handed me a stack of bright orange and blue stickers that had to be posted along the fence. Big bold letters across the front. Notice of pending boundary survey. Do not remove. The judge was very clear about that part. Those notices had to stay up until the county finished the survey. Simple enough. So that evening I walked the length of my fence line just before sunset, peeling each sticker off the backing and pressing it firmly onto the posts. There must have been 15 of them by the time I finished. Bright orange squares running all the way down the fence. Yeah, they were a little ugly, but they were temporary, and more importantly, they were required. I didn't give it much thought after that. I went inside, made dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed. The next morning, I stepped out onto my front porch with a cup of coffee like I did most days. Birds chirping, sprinklers ticking somewhere down the street. Just another quiet suburban morning. And that's when I saw Lorraine walking toward my backyard. She had that leather folder tucked under her arm and a Starbucks cup in her hand, marching across the grass like a woman on a mission. The moment she reached the fence, she stopped, hands on hips, head tilted, and even from my porch I could see the look on her face. Disgust. Then she reached out, grabbed one of the bright orange stickers, and peeled it straight off the fence. I nearly dropped my coffee. By the time I got halfway across the yard, Lorraine already had the notice crumpled in her hand and was reaching for the next one. "Lorraine!" I shouted. She froze, slowly turned around, and gave me that tight little smile she always used when she was about to tell someone they were breaking the rules. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I asked, still trying to catch my breath. She held up the crumpled sticker like it was a piece of trash she'd just picked off the sidewalk. "These," she said calmly, "are not allowed." I blinked. "Not allowed. They're an eyesore," she replied. Section 3.2 of the HOA guidelines. No signage or markings that disrupt community appearance. I stared at her for a second, then pointed at the sticker in her hand. "Lorraine, that's a court notice." She actually laughed. A short little laugh. "Oh please," she said. "You can't just slap ugly stickers on your fence and claim they're official." I took a step forward and said, a little more firmly this time, "Lorraine, don't." My voice came out calmer than I felt, but inside my chest my heart was already thumping faster. Something about the way she had grabbed that first notice, crumpled it up like a gum wrapper. It just hit a nerve. She paused with her fingers on the corner of the next sticker, looked at me over those big sunglasses, and tilted her head slightly. "Don't what?" she asked. "Don't take those down." She rolled her eyes a little, the way someone does when they think they're dealing with a stubborn child. "These things are bright orange," she said, holding the wrinkled notice up between two fingers. "They're absolutely hideous. And they're clearly not approved signage." I rubbed a hand over my face. "Lorraine, they're not signage. They're legal notices. The judge ordered them." She snorted softly. "Judges don't regulate neighborhood aesthetics," she said. Now at this point I was starting to feel that slow burn in my chest that usually tells me I'm about to lose patience, but I forced myself to breathe for a second. "Listen," I said. "This is part of the boundary dispute with Dale. The court ordered these posted until the survey crew comes out." Lorraine's mouth twisted into something between a smirk and a smile. "Oh, I'm aware of your little property disagreement," she said. Little property disagreement. That phrase alone told me everything about how seriously she was taking this. "But regardless," she continued, "the HOA charter clearly states that no visual markers, signs, stickers, or temporary postings are permitted on fences without board approval." I stared at her. "Are you serious right now?" "Completely." She started reaching for the next sticker again. That was when I pulled my phone out of my pocket. "Lorraine." She paused again. I unlocked the screen, scrolled through my photos for a second, and then turned it toward her. "This is the court order," I said. The photo showed the paperwork sitting on the clerk's desk the day before, the judge's signature right there at the bottom, along with the instructions about posting the notices. Lorraine leaned forward just slightly, glanced at the screen for maybe 2 seconds, then waved it away. "I don't care what that says." For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. "You don't care?" "This is a private community," she said, crossing her arms. "Everyone who lives here agreed to follow the HOA bylaws." I pointed at the fence. "And the bylaws outrank a judge now." She didn't even hesitate. "In matters of neighborhood appearance, yes." I just blinked at her. Then I did the one thing that probably saved me a lot of trouble later. I hit the record button on my phone. The camera switched on, and I held it up between us. "Go ahead," I said calmly. "Say that again." Lorraine's eyes flicked down to the phone. For the first time since this whole thing started, she hesitated. "You're being ridiculous," she muttered. "Maybe," I said. "But if you peel another one of those off while I'm recording, I'll send the video straight to the county judge." Her hand slowly dropped away from the sticker. She stood there for a moment, lips pressed tight, clearly weighing whether this fight was worth it right now. Then she took a small step back. "Well," she said stiffly, "this will have to be addressed at the next HOA meeting." I shrugged. "Sounds good." She glared at me like I had personally insulted her ancestors. This kind of behavior disrupts the harmony of the community, and removing court notices doesn't. I asked. She didn't answer, just turned on her heel and walked back across the yard, heels digging into the grass with each step. As she disappeared down the sidewalk, I let out a long breath and looked down at the crumpled sticker in my hand. I smoothed it out as best I could and pressed it back onto the fence. At the time, I figured that was the end of it. Lorraine had backed off once she saw the camera, and the meeting she mentioned wasn't for another few days anyway. Plenty of time for cooler heads to prevail. Or so I thought. But small neighborhoods have a way of turning tiny conflicts into full-blown neighborhood theater. By the time Thursday evening rolled around, half the subdivision seemed to know about the sticker incident. I could tell the moment I walked into the clubhouse. The HOA meetings were always held in this little multi-purpose room next to the community pool. Folding chairs, long plastic tables, bad fluorescent lighting, the whole setup. Usually only about 8 or 9 people showed up. That night, there were nearly 20. As soon as I walked in, a couple neighbors glanced over at me with that curious expression people get when they're trying not to stare. I spotted my friend Greg near the back. Greg lived 2 houses down from me and was about the most easygoing guy you could imagine. Retired firefighter, always grilling something in his driveway on weekends. He leaned over as I sat next to him. "You're the sticker guy now," he whispered. I chuckled under my breath. Apparently. Up at the front of the room, Lorraine was already seated at the head of the table with the other board members. There were 3 of them besides her. Nancy Collins, who handled the HOA finances. Quiet woman, always wore reading glasses on a chain. Mark Donnelly, a younger guy who'd moved in a few years ago and looked like he'd rather be anywhere else most of the time. And Patricia Hall, who mostly just nodded at whatever Lorraine said. Lorraine glanced up as I took my seat. That same tight smile again. The meeting started with the usual stuff. Budget updates. Landscaping contracts. Someone complaining about teenagers cutting across their lawn. But about 20 minutes in, Lorraine cleared her throat and straightened the stack of papers in front of her. "We have one additional matter of community concern to address," she announced. Every head in the room slowly turned toward me. Lorraine lifted a handful of printed photographs and began passing them down the table. "I took these yesterday morning," she said. They were pictures of my fence. Every single orange notice in full view. "Now, as you can clearly see," she continued, tapping one of the photos, "these garish stickers have been placed all along the boundary of Lot 27. Garish. That word again. "They violate multiple HOA aesthetic standards," she said, "and create a visual disruption to the harmony of the neighborhood." Greg leaned over again and whispered, "Harmony of the neighborhood." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Lorraine continued her speech like she was presenting evidence in a courtroom. "I attempted to remove one of these items yesterday morning as part of my responsibilities on the board," she said. "But the homeowner reacted with hostility." Hostility? That was new. I slowly stood up. "Before the board votes on anything," I said, "you might want to look at this." I walked to the front of the room and placed several copies of the court order on the table. Nancy adjusted her glasses and picked one up. Mark leaned forward in his chair. Lorraine looked at the papers like someone had just placed a dead fish in front of her. "These notices were issued under a county court order," I said calmly. "They're required to stay posted until the official survey is completed." Nancy scanned the page for a moment. Then her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Well," she said quietly, "this does appear to be legitimate." Lorraine's jaw tightened. "Yes, but the aesthetic." "The aesthetic," I said, "doesn't override a judge." Mark rubbed his chin and glanced at Lorraine. "Is that true?" he asked. Nancy nodded slowly. "If this order requires the notices to remain, then yes." Lorraine opened her mouth to argue again, but nothing really came out except a frustrated little exhale. Her motion to issue a fine died right there on the table. The room grew quiet for a few seconds. Then Greg gave a soft little clap in the back. Not loud, just enough that a few people chuckled. Lorraine shot him a glare that could melt paint. I sat back down, feeling that little rush of victory that comes when someone tries to bully you and it backfires. But Lorraine's expression told me something important. This wasn't over. Not even close. For a few days after the meeting, things were quiet. The stickers stayed up. Lorraine avoided eye contact whenever we passed on the sidewalk. And I started to think maybe she had finally accepted that she'd pushed too far. That illusion lasted exactly 5 days. It was a Saturday morning. I was halfway through making breakfast when someone knocked on my front door. When I opened it, a sheriff's deputy was standing on the porch holding a folded piece of paper. "Morning," he said politely. "Morning. Are you the owner of Lot 27? My stomach dropped a little. "Yeah, that's me." He handed me the paper. "You've been served." For a second, I just stood there in the doorway holding the paper while the deputy walked back down my driveway. You know those moments where your brain needs a couple seconds to catch up with what just happened? That was one of them. Finally, I looked down and unfolded the document. Right there across the top it said, "Complaint filed, Homeowners Association of Briarwood Estates." My eyes moved down the page, and there it was. Unauthorized signage. Violation of community standards. Accumulated fines, $1,540. I actually laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, more like the kind of laugh you make when something is so ridiculous your brain doesn't know how else to react. She'd really done it. Lorraine had actually filed a small claims case against me over those stickers. And the wildest part was that she knew exactly where they came from. She had seen the court order with her own eyes. Still, there I was, standing in my kitchen 10 minutes later, reading through the paperwork again while my coffee went cold on the counter. There was a hearing date set for about 4 weeks later. Apparently, Lorraine had decided if she couldn't win the argument at the HOA meeting, she'd try to drag it into a courtroom. That was when I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. Her name is Dana Whitaker. Dana had been helping me through the property dispute with Dale, and by that point she already knew the entire situation better than I did. When she answered, I said, "You're gonna like this one." I explained the whole thing. Lorraine ripping down the notice, the HOA meeting, and now the lawsuit. There was a pause on the line. Then Dana started laughing. Not politely. Full-on laughing. "Oh, wow," she said between breaths. She really stepped in it this time. "So that's good news?" "It's very good news," Dana said. "Because if she filed this knowing those notices were issued under a judge's order, that's harassment at best, and potentially contempt at worst." I leaned back against the kitchen counter. "So what do we do?" Dana's voice shifted into that calm, professional tone lawyers use when they're about to dismantle somebody. We let her talk. Over the next few weeks, I started gathering everything. Copies of the court order, photos of the notices along the fence, screenshots of the HOA complaint, and most importantly, the video I recorded the morning Lorraine tried to peel the stickers off. That video turned out to be the crown jewel. You could clearly see her standing there, holding the crumpled notice, saying those exact words. "HOA rules come first around here." Dana watched it once and just smiled. Perfect. The hearing finally arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. Small claims court isn't anything like the dramatic courtroom scenes you see on TV. No big jury box, no booming speeches. Just a small room with a judge's bench, a couple rows of seats, and people quietly waiting their turn. When I walked in, Lorraine was already there. And I have to admit, she looked like she was preparing for battle. Pearl necklace, cream-colored blazer, that same leather folder tucked under her arm. She glanced over when I entered, and for a moment our eyes met. The look she gave me could have frozen a lake, but underneath it, I thought I saw a little flicker of uncertainty. Dana arrived a minute later and sat beside me. "Relax," she whispered. "This won't take long." Eventually the clerk called our case. Lorraine stood up immediately and walked to the front with the confidence of someone who had spent years telling other people they were wrong. The judge was a man named Harold Benton. Late 60s, half-moon glasses, the kind of face that suggested he had very little patience for nonsense. He looked down at the paperwork in front of him. "Homeowners Association versus Michael Carter," he said. "That's me," I replied. Lorraine cleared her throat and began speaking before the judge had even fully looked up. "Your Honor, the homeowner has placed unauthorized signage along his property fence that violates community regulations and..." The judge held up a hand. "Ma'am, slow down." Lorraine stopped mid-sentence. He glanced at her paperwork. "You're seeking $1,500 in fines." "Yes, Your Honor." "For stickers." Lorraine straightened her shoulders. They are not approved signage. The judge turned to me. Mr. Carter? Dana gave me a small nod. I stepped forward and placed our folder on the bench. Your Honor, those notices were posted under a court order regarding a property boundary survey. The judge's eyebrow lifted slightly. Oh. Dana slid a copy of the order across the bench. Judge Benton adjusted his glasses and read it carefully. The room went very quiet. Lorraine stood there stiff as a statue. After about 30 seconds, the judge looked up directly at her. Ma'am, he said calmly, did you remove one of these notices? Lorraine hesitated. Well, I attempted to correct a violation of HOA standards. That's not what I asked. She swallowed. I removed one sticker, yes. The judge nodded slowly. Then Dana spoke. Your Honor, if I may. She held up my phone. We also have video of that moment. Lorraine's head snapped toward me. The judge gestured. Let's see it. Dana pressed play. The clip lasted maybe 20 seconds. Just long enough to show Lorraine holding the crumpled notice and confidently explaining that HOA rules came before a judge. When the video ended, the silence in the room felt heavy. Judge Benton leaned back slightly in his chair. Then he looked at Lorraine again. Ma'am, those notices were issued under my court's authority. Lorraine's face had gone pale. I wasn't aware. You were shown the order, Dana said gently. Lorraine didn't answer. The judge sighed. Removing or interfering with a court notice could be considered contempt, he said. Lorraine's mouth opened, but no words came out. Judge Benton turned toward me. The defendant has not violated any law or covenant. He looked back at Lorraine. On the contrary, this lawsuit appears frivolous. You could almost hear the air leave her lungs. The judge closed the file. Case dismissed. Then he added one more sentence. Plaintiff will cover the defendant's legal fees. For a moment, Lorraine just stood there frozen, like someone had pulled the batteries out of her. Dana leaned toward me and whispered, Told you. We gathered our papers and walked toward the exit. As I reached the doorway, Lorraine finally turned toward me. Her expression was something between fury and disbelief. But for the first time since I'd moved into that neighborhood, she didn't say a single word. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter somehow. Dana shook my hand. Enjoy the quiet, she said. I suspect Lorraine will keep her distance for a while. She wasn't wrong. Back in the neighborhood, things changed almost overnight. The stickers stayed up until the county survey team finally came out 2 weeks later and confirmed the boundary exactly where the fence already stood. Dale never mentioned the dispute again. And Lorraine? Well, let's just say the HOA meetings became a lot shorter. She still lived 2 houses down, still walked the neighborhood in her linen outfits. But whenever we crossed paths, she suddenly found something very interesting to look at somewhere else. No lectures, no letters, no clipboard inspections, just silence. And honestly, that silence was probably the most peaceful thing that had happened in that neighborhood in years. Now I'm curious what you think. Was Lorraine just stubborn and embarrassed? Or do you think she actually believed HOA rules could override a judge? Have you ever dealt with someone in your neighborhood who took a little bit of authority way too seriously? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read a lot of them, and some of your stories are honestly even crazier than mine. And if you enjoy these real-life neighbor drama stories, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Because trust me, suburban neighborhoods are full of situations that get a lot stranger than people expect. Alright, I'll see you in the next one.